Hello, everyone. Welcome to the BookTrib live chat. It is my sincere pleasure today to introduce you to Bina Shah. She's a journalist and the author of the new book, A Season for Martyrs. It just came out on Tuesday. And she's a regular contributor to the International New York Times. She's a frequent guest on the BBC, and she's contributed essays to Granta, The Independent, and The Guardian. She has degrees from Wellesley College and Harvard Graduate School of Education. She's an alumna of the University of Iowa's International Writers Workshop. She's basically incredible. And so we're so pleased to have her here today. And her book, A Season for Martyrs, is personally one of my favorite books of the year. Booklist said that it elegantly mixes the pathos and grace that make up the soul of the Sind. And we'll get into more about what that means in a little bit. But today we're giving away a few copies of A Season for Martyrs. So after the chat, please head over to booktrib.com to enter to win. And as always, remember to sign up at BookTrib for the latest on live chats, giveaways, original content, and more. So without further ado, please help me welcome Bina Shah. Thanks so much for being here with us today.
Thank you for having me. It's nice to be here.
For those of our viewers who aren't so familiar with your new book, can you tell us a little bit more about it?
Sure. Okay, so A Season for Martyrs is a novel that kind of is doing two things at once. It's got two threads. The first is a contemporary thread that takes place in Pakistan, mostly in Karachi, which is where I live, in the province of Sindh. And it takes place during the last 3 months of Benazir Bhutto's life, from October 18th, 2007, the day that she arrived in Pakistan from exile. She was exiled for many, many years, all the way until December 27th, 2007, which is the day that she was assassinated. So the modern story takes place in those 3 months, and it's told from the viewpoint of a young journalist called Ali Sikandar, who is assigned by his TV station to cover the arrival of Benazir Bhutto. And he has personally a lot of baggage. Some of it is tied into Benazir Bhutto and the effect of her political party on his life and his family life. And some of it is his own personal stuff. So he goes through these 3 months, which are very, very intense and very pressured, and a lot is happening politically and socially in Pakistan during those times. And it really tests him as a person. He's a young guy. He's about 25, 26 or so. And he's really struggling with who he is. So that's one thread of the story. The other thread is more of the historical fiction type, because I take vignettes that are taken from the history of Sindh. This is a very rich province where we live. It's the southernmost province of Pakistan. It's the province that Benazir Bhutto came from. It's the province that I come from. And so I take historical episodes that actually really did happen, and I fictionalize them, and I intersperse them with the action in Ali's story to give the reader a much more in-depth and deeper sense of the land and the history in which the modern story is set. And the historical tales always parallel sort of what's going on in each modern chapter. So there's a definite interlacing of the stories. And by the time you get to the end, they meet, they join together.
That's wonderful. And this is, I should mention, this is your U.S. literary debut. And, you know, I'll just jump into actually a viewer question right here. It's from Yvette. She says, did you have any reservations bringing your work into America?
No, not at all. But I didn't think that it would happen like this. When I had set out to write this novel, I always envisioned that it might be published at first in the UK. Just because, you know, the United Kingdom has a lot of ties with India and Pakistan. We used to be a former colony of the UK, and so the history of Pakistan and India is tied up to their rule in what they call the British Raj, so that's British India. So I thought there would be more interest in this kind of historical story. To my surprise, the book actually first sold in Italy and was published in translation. And then it sold in the United States. And as I said, I was surprised. I didn't know that there might be readership for this kind of a story. But I guess given the current climate and sort of our current events that are going on these days, there is a lot of interest in Pakistan. So I was really excited to have the chance to be published in America.
Hmm. You know, some writers say that they have a book in them for a very long time. Is A Season for Martyrs the kind of story that you've always wanted to write? Is it something that, you know, how did it come about? How did you decide to do it in the way that you did with the kind of dual narratives that eventually come together? I guess that's a loaded question, but I'd love to know what you think.
Well, you know, growing up in my family with a lot of ties to Sindh, especially to the rural parts of Sindh, where there's a lot of farming that takes place, and I heard so many stories about the history of this province and about my own family's history and ancestors. And it was fascinating to me to listen to these tales growing up, although I don't think I really fully appreciated them as a child or as a teenager or even a young adult. But as I grew older, I started to think that some of these tales should really be set down somewhere. And then when Benazir Bhutto was killed, it was right around the time that I was actually teaching writing at a university here in Karachi. And I had been so impressed with my students. I was teaching in the Faculty of Media Sciences, and I was so impressed with these, you know, young adults who were just finding their way in the world. So the main character of Ali Sikandar was inspired by the people that I was meeting along in my work. Benazir was assassinated, and it struck me that nobody had written about her in fictionalized form since Salman Rushdie wrote about her in his very early novel Shame.
Mhm.
So these three things were going on in my mind at the same time, and I thought, can I write a novel that combines all of them? And you know, I think maybe it was extremely ambitious to hope that I could do it, but
Mhm.
I sat down to try, and looks like it worked out okay.
It certainly did. Now, following up, Jordan says, how do you iron out voice, perspective, and characters? Is it something that you outline, or is it something that just unfolds naturally in the process?
That's a great question. And the answer for this, I would say the answer is that it differs from book to book. Different books require different types of strategizing before you write them. This book required a lot of research. I mean, before I even wrote a word, I read history books for 6 months, and I talked to people, and I just really got all my information together. At the same time that I was researching, based on what I would find out, I was able to plan the structure of the novel, as I said before, with the interlaced chapters. So I did that much before I started writing. Uh, as far as outlines go, I mean, an outline is kind of what they tell you to do. They give a lot of advice to people who want to write, and they tell you do an outline, do plot outlines, do this, do that. But I found that that's a kind of crude way of doing it, and I think there are more sophisticated ways to plan your book out and structure it. So I wouldn't say that I did an outline, but I actually did, this is different what I did. I used mind mapping software. I don't know if
Okay.
you are familiar with that,
Yeah.
but you put your, and a friend of mine was doing this at the time, and he's very enthusiastic about it. So I thought, okay, I'll try. You put your ideas not as outlines like they teach you, like in high school, how to
Right.
write a paper, you know, A, B, C. Instead, you put your ideas as circles and things branching out from them. And so I had these pieces of paper with circles and things happening everywhere. And that kind of circular structure helped me plot the novel a lot better than a linear outline. So
Mhm.
that's, sorry to give you such a technical
No,
answer, but that is actually how I did it.
I'd love to
There's
know,
no such
clearly.
thing as things unfolding naturally. I mean, because, you know, you're in control of everything. At the same time that you do sort of wait for inspiration to strike, you do have to have very tight control over it to make it do what you want it to do as a story.
Right. Excellent. Now I have a question. It's going in a little bit of a different direction, but it does tie in.
Sure.
You commented in a recent story from the BBC about Sindhi culture and Sufi culture under under extremist threat in Pakistan. And I wanted to know, does that make this type of, I mean, obviously it makes this type of storytelling that you're doing so much more important, because you're bringing a culture that I think is, I don't think it's presumptuous of me to say that it's a little understood in the West, Sindhi culture. And how does that, does that make it more important today than it has been, or has it always been important but no one's really paying attention? What do you think about that?
Well, there are two types of cultures that I'm actually bringing attention to in the book. One is Sindhi culture, as you point out, and that's the culture that is, prevalent in the province, but that's restricted to the geographical location of Pakistan itself. The other culture that I'm bringing out is Sufi culture. Now, Sufism is the branch of mystical Islam. Most people associate it with Rumi and his poetry, but
Right.
Sufism is actually much broader and much deeper and has many different, what's the word I'm looking for, many different variations and versions all across the Muslim world. And what I was trying to capture was the Sufi culture that is particular to Sindh, how it's practiced in Sindh. And as you rightly say, this is culture that very few people know about outside of Pakistan, and a lot of people inside Pakistan don't know it either. So I was exploring that world myself and writing the novel at the same time. And as far as it being an endangered culture, well, we are threatened by religious extremism in many different ways, and this is one of those ways where religious extremists would like to stamp out these practices, and they consider them to be antithetical to the Puritan type of religion that they feel everybody should practice in Pakistan. So my writing about this culture was, in a way, my resistance against that idea and that threat.
Excellent. Okay, now let's see here. Paula has a question. She says, you're a journalist and a writer. Which one came first, and do you prefer wearing one hat over another?
Honestly, I think both came along at the same time, and I don't even know why I got given the title of journalist, because really what I feel I do is write a lot of just personal essays with a lot of opinions in them. But when I was starting out as a writer, I did start out as a journalist. I worked for IT magazines, writing about the internet and computer technology, which had just come to Pakistan in a really big way in the late 90s.
Mm-hmm.
So that was very dry, technical kind of work, but at the same time, I was always trying to write essays and get them posted on different websites, and I started writing features for various magazines in Pakistan, freelancing, so on and so forth. So I've always done the two together, and usually both types of work inform each other. What I tend to write about for newspapers or websites or magazines often still resides in my subconscious, and then it will come out in a different form, in a short story or something fictionalized or a blog post or what have you. So I am a very lucky person in that I have a big enough head that can fit two hats on it.
Definitely. Now, going back to the book quickly, Alexandra wants to know which character you're able to sympathize the most with in the story.
I would say it is the character of Ali Sekunder's father,
Okay.
who is an older gentleman and has been estranged from his family because he decided that he was going to marry twice. Now, you know that in the Muslim religion, polygamy is allowed, and people can take more than one wife, although it isn't very common. It's also very expensive to maintain many families at once. So most people don't do that. But in this case, Ali's father has done so, and he's really ripped apart the family with profound effects on Ali's psyche and on his brother and his sister and his mother. And Ali's very angry with him. But at the same time, Ali Sekunder's father is a man from a different generation, and he has been through a lot in his life. He's seen a lot. And the choices that he makes are not always comprehensible to Ali, but they are choices that in some ways were very much forced on him. And so I had a lot of sympathy for that character because he was very much like a lot of the men in my own family, in my extended family. I had uncles and grandfather and so on and so forth who faced a lot of those same situations where their choices were not really theirs.
Mm-hmm.
And they did odd things, sometimes like marrying again or whatever, just to assert their own independence. So it was a strange dynamic, but it was one that I felt I had sympathy for. And I tried my best to portray this character in a way so that what appears to be dislikable or loathsome in him from Ali's perspective is actually pretty understandable when you get to see and hear his own perspective.
Hmm. Now, Stephanie wants to know, she says, how was the title A Season for Martyrs chosen? Because I know when it was published in a different country, it had a different title. It went through a few different incarnations. So I'd love to know the story behind A Season for Martyrs.
Well, this is a kind of funny story. One of my father's favorite movies is actually about a writer, and it's called Finding Forrester. So it stars Sean Connery as this very garrulous writer who has agoraphobia and doesn't come out of his apartment for 30 years or something. And he takes on a young protege, and the protege stumbles on one of his essays, which was published in the New Yorker in God knows 1950-something. And it's called A Season of Faith's Perfection. And he takes that title and he puts it on his own paper and he gets caught for plagiarism and so on and so forth. And when I was racking my brains for a good title for this book, I kept thinking of a season for, a season of, and the words they sounded good to me, but I didn't actually like A Season of Faith's Perfection. And then I thought about the book in that it has so much to do with sacrifice and people dying and being considered martyrs in Pakistan. And in Islam, martyrdom is a very important concept. And then I thought about how the last 3 months of Benazir's life were 3 months, a season. So, boom, A Season for Martyrs. It just worked.
Oh, perfect. Definitely. Lonnie has a question here. He says you cover a wide range of topics when not necessarily writing novels, but you cover women's issues, literature, education, the way Pakistan is presented in popular culture. Do you have a favorite topic to talk about, and what really calls to you the most?
Women's rights. Women's rights. And people are they must be sick of me by now banging on about women's rights, but that is my favorite subject, and the subject that I get most angry about, and the subject that I'm most passionate about, and women's rights. Beyond a doubt.
Is there a specific issue that you're writing about right now? Is there a certain problem that you're addressing? What has your attention about that at the moment?
I have been writing a lot about Malala Yousafzai in the last couple of years, especially after she'd been shot. And that encompassed quite a few issues: girls' rights, women's rights, education, extremism, the response to extremism, and how do we bear up against all these terrible conflicts that we face in our country. So that was something that really took up a lot of mental space. Just the wider issue of why women are treated as second and third class citizens in our country. What are the factors, legal and social and cultural, that have gone into creating such situations, and how do we make things change? I mean, what do we do to change this situation? And the tremendous efforts of women from all walks of life, not just activists in women's rights groups, but the ordinary woman or the woman from a very poor background, or young women, students. How are they standing up and claiming their rights? So these are the things that I have been privileged enough to witness happening in my own country, and it's impossible not to chronicle them. Right,
of course. And this, Malala is certainly, I mean, to say she's incredible is an understatement, but, it's something that I think is just, it's wonderful. Have you had a chance to speak with her directly?
No, never. No, I
Hmm.
haven't. Everybody wants her.
I can imagine. Now, there's been a lot of criticism about the depiction of Pakistan in the show, popular show Homeland. And you recently wrote a piece that, for the International New York Times, you wrote an op-ed that was created such a stir that it ran in the U.S. edition. And
That's right.
Can you tell me, for those who aren't familiar with your piece, can you tell us a little bit more about, the way you and other Pakistanis kind of respond to that kind of stereotypical depiction and what you think about that?
Well, it's really funny because in the case of that piece, people seemed to think all I was doing was complaining about some very petty things, like that the actors were not actually Pakistani or that they were speaking a different language than what would be normal for the area in which they were supposed to come from. And those are cosmetic things on one level, and I knew that, Hollywood often will film in different places and use different people. So it was really funny to see people sort of picking on that and saying, well, what do you expect? It's Hollywood. And then on
Mhm.
another level, there were people saying, why are you complaining? Of course you're all terrorists. Of course you're all,
Yeah.
criminals. And you had Osama bin Laden for so many years, and you're all like this. So if the shoe fits, just wear it, man. So there were a lot of different things going on, and it really evoked a lot of, it evoked a lot of emotions in people that I wasn't expecting, or I was surprised to uncover. Of course, my fellow Pakistanis were saying, yeah, we've been saying this all along, how Hollywood portrays us is just really awful. And then the Arabs said, yeah, you think you have it bad? What about us? And then the Italians chimed in and said, but they always show us like mobsters, so, quit complaining. So I mean, it would seem that the only people who get portrayed with any accuracy in Hollywood is like, wasps. I don't know. So the whole thing turned very heated, and it was amusing and a little perplexing at the same time, when what I had tried to do was write an essay about the reversal of perspective.
Right.
Now, that was what I was really getting at. What did it mean for me as a Pakistani to see myself reflected in the eyes of outsiders? And I was using Homeland, the show, as the jumping off point, when I could have chosen any other movie or any other TV production or what have you. So I kind of strayed from the thrust of your question, I
That's
know. But
okay. I mean, I just wanted to
I'm
kind of know your thoughts about it, what the response has been, that sort of thing.
Yeah,
Um,
it was very odd. I mean, 500 plus comments on the New York Times page, and people getting actually like Googling me and finding out things about my childhood and mentioning them in the comments. But the really great thing was that I had about a dozen people who actually found out my email address and emailed me to tell me how great they thought the
oh,
piece was. Many of them had visited Pakistan. I'm talking about Americans. Many of them
mhm.
had visited Pakistan and told me that they knew the truth about what this country is really like, or at least what it had been like when they visited, and they were really, really supportive and very sympathetic. And again, my main point in the piece was A, to look at the reversal of perspective, and B, to talk about the responsibility of artists, whether it was appropriate for them to create art that divides us or brings us together as a global community, as different countries, as different cultures. Of course, people didn't want to hear anything about that. It's just entertainment. Can't you shut up and just watch it?
Of course.
So it was very interesting. It was extremely interesting.
Well, this leads into this next question from Alexandra. She says, do you receive any criticism online or from people you know based on the column you write monthly for the Pakistan newspaper Dawn?
I mean, I receive criticism online for everything I do. So yes, definitely, I get criticism. I mean, I can't win. Often I'll get, one week I'll write something and conservatives will bash me. One week I'll write something and, Americans will bash me. One
Mm-hmm.
week I'll write something and men will bash me. The next week I'll write something and women will get at me. So online criticism is just par for the course in today's age of journalism, especially digital journalism. And in an age where we want to be able to access our writers and our journalists and our news producers and content providers, we want that access, and often it's just to tell them how stupid we think they are. So, yeah, it's a
Mm-hmm.
big part of my job to get that, but not to
Right.
be too put off by it.
Mm-hmm. Now, you recently wrote a piece for BookTrib.com about publishing's love affair with putting veiled women on the covers. And you mentioned, if you don't mind, I'm just going to read the beginning of it. You say, if you go to a bookstore, chances are you'll see a lot of veiled women looking at you. They gaze mysteriously at you from behind veils covering their faces, revealing only large, dark, coal-lined eyes. Their veils may be black or they may be colored and decorated with exotic jewels. Um, and you go on to talk about how if there's a book about Middle East, Afghanistan, Pakistan, or women from any other country, there's chances are there's a veiled woman on the cover. And I wanted to know how you feel, because there's a woman with a scarf. It's different from, she doesn't have the eyes peering over a veil, but there's a woman with a scarf, and it's similar to the way Benazir Bhutto, I guess, wore a scarf. But I want to know how you feel that this is, how you feel about that, if this is something different that you view as different, or similarly in line with the tradition of, a veiled woman when dealing with someone from South Asia or anything like that.
No, I felt it was absolutely different because, for one thing, the woman on the cover is absolutely meant to make you think of Benazir Bhutto. It's not Benazir Bhutto.
Mm-hmm.
It's not her. But Benazir Bhutto was well known for wearing a white scarf over her head. And just the way the woman's features are, and there was just something about her pose, and it really makes you think of Benazir. So I thought that was really masterful on the part of the graphic designer to find that photograph and to put it there on the cover, because Benazir Bhutto is such a strong motif, sort of the guiding spirit of the book, and she does make an appearance later on. I felt it was entirely appropriate. And nor was she being represented as an anonymous woman, nor was she being represented as somebody silenced, somebody in pain, somebody being oppressed or beaten or tortured or, married off at the age of 7, so on and so forth. So I didn't feel that it was done in the same vein. And if I had, I would have definitely, I could have said, look, I don't like it. I had the option, and I loved the cover, so I had no problem with it whatsoever.
It's absolutely beautiful. I mean, it's so gorgeous. Now, question, I want to know what you have going on next. What you're writing next? Do you have a novel in the works, or what's going on? Tell me everything.
I have something that I've been trying to work on for the last year, and it's a really hard novel, and it's a mouthful, but it's a feminist dystopian futuristic kind of thing.
That sounds
It's not
amazing.
science fiction, but it is crazy. Everything, writing is crazy. Writers are crazy. It's not science fiction, but it is what I would say speculative fiction, along the
Mm,
lines of something Margaret Atwood might write, or so that kind of thing. And what I'm trying to do with it is take all the trends that I'm seeing that are very anti-women and very misogynistic and very sort of repressive women that we see today, and casting it forward into the future and trying to imagine what the repercussions and consequences of that might look like if we continue the trends that we have today, where we're sort of, there's this backlash against feminism. There's a strong movement to repress and to sort of be regressive about women's rights all over the world, not just in Pakistan or Muslim countries or the Middle East, but
right.
even in the United States, even in, where they want to roll back so many advances that women have made, especially in the areas, reproductive rights or whatever.
Hmm.
So I'm trying to work on, but this one, going back to that earlier question that I had about, do I outline my books or does it happen naturally? This one, I've outlined it very barely, and I am really trying to let it be more organic, but it's that much more difficult just because I don't really know what is going to happen from
Mhm.
day to day when I sit down to write it. But I also feel that this novel needs that kind of approach, so I'm going with it for now. We'll see.
I can't wait. I mean, it sounds amazing, and I can't wait to read that one. But the book right now that's out is A Season for Martyrs. Everybody, please go out and buy it. It's absolutely wonderful. I want to thank you, Bina, for talking with us today and sharing more information about your writing process and what you have going on and everything. And thank you so much. And everybody, remember, we are giving away copies of the book on BookTrib, so head back over when this chat is over and you can enter to win. Thanks so much.
Thank you. It's been my absolute pleasure.